Hey, Dean.
Hey, Wags.
What you doing?
I'm ready to drink.
All right.
Lombardi's Legends podcast. We've got a former professional bartender here, Wags. What are you thinking?
I think today we should make a Bernie Blast. And, of course, we're going to be using Leaf Spirits vodka. And then let's just go ahead and get started here, Dave, shall we? So
let's do it.
First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to put 1.5 ounces of OJ in the bottom of an empty glass.
So this is like a health drink then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to just cover that with ice. And then, now we're going to move over to the side. And if we could come in here and take a close look, we're going to pour in ingredients successively in separate mixing glass. We've got our vodka. Your choice of blue Caraco.
Blue Caraco?
Absolutely.
Do they have green and gold Caraco, do you know?
I don't think it would be necessary for green and gold.
Okay.
As much as I love where your head's at, Dane, it's blue. And then we're going to put in some ginger ale, 4.5 ounces of lemonade. All right. And now we're ready to mix. So if you have a mixer, we can just go ahead. This is an old bartender trick. When you're at your tailgate, just pour it back and forth. We've got our main drink glass with the OJ. We're ready to go.
I'll tell you what, I'm excited to drink some of this Leaf Spirit vodka. Whatever it's in, it's going to be really good. I know that.
All right. And finally, we are going to garnish with a lemon twist.
Okay. There's the gold portion of our green and gold. I like it.
There you go, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. Let me have a sip. It's delicious. Smooth Leaf Spirits vodka. Terrific. Thank you, Wags.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers.
Go back, go!
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will.
All right, welcome into Lombardi's Legends, aka tonight's Darkness Retreat. I am Wagstradamus, and joining me as always is Dane. Tonight, we are going to embrace the inner weird. We've got to try to figure out what's going on with our current starting quarterback, and we're going to use the mystic powers of darkness to try to predict who the Packers are going to re-sign this offseason.
Indeed, Wags. I'm going to keep it extra dark down here in the podcast room tonight as we try to figure out what in the world the Packers do with free agents and what we do with the cap and everything else going on in Green Bay. It's going to be a mindful and very enlightening podcast here tonight.
Yeah. So, Dane, I think, we did our position reviews in the last couple of podcasts, but I think tonight what we want to do is dig a little bit deeper. So to set the stage, maybe we should talk about how much money can the Packers realistically get under the cap. And there's so many different scenarios because it depends. Is Rodgers back? Is he not back? And then we go on down the line with some of these other guys. So even before getting to our free agent list, we've got to figure out if you're going to put our GM cap on, what will the Packers do depending on which route they want to go? Which path do they want to follow? If they bring Rodgers at all back, are they going to try to do what they've done in the past couple off seasons, which is do a bunch of restructuring, try to free up some money, and then maybe make some moves on the margins and get creative with some of the re-signings that they do by front-loading contracts, putting in some different bonus stipulations, different ways that Russ Ball and Goody have been able to work together to re-sign some of the guys that they bought back the last couple of seasons. But Dane, I think I'm just going to ask you right off the bat. We don't expect, I don't think, that this is going to be a rollback off season. That said, I think that's a good place to start. So if you had to make a prediction, what percentage likelihood do you think that the Packers look at this and say, you know what, let's do the same type of plan that we followed the last couple off seasons, restructure, try to free up as much cash as we can, bring everyone back, and see if we can make some moves on the margins?
Yeah, I think like 10% realistically. I think that the Packers are looking to make some significant changes this offseason. It feels different this year than it has in the last couple of years. And that, frankly, could be one of the biggest reasons that um, Aaron Rodgers isn't quite interested in sticking around, right? Potentially. I think that it's probably pretty clear he'd like to see some of his dudes back with him. He's a vet. He wants to see vets around him. And the Packers it might come down to, hey, we'd love to have you back, Aaron, but we're going to do things the way we need to do it. We need to bring in some fresh blood at some pretty key positions. And that doesn't mesh very well with some of the relationships with some of the guys he has on the roster. So it wouldn't surprise me at all, Wags, if we see some pretty significant wholesale changes across the board on this team this year.
Okay. And I do want to point out that given the option to restructure Aaron Rodgers' contract, that could save them just under 11 million against the cap this season in 2023, and then 20 million 2024, 20 almost 25 million 2025. So that's the duration of the contract that he signed last offseason. And I know that you're looking at that escalating cap number, especially after this year it goes to 40 million and then 59 million in 2025. But with the restructure, that gets it to a pretty palatable number. So clearly, this contract was set up and it was designed to say we can reevaluate after 1 year into this contract. And if the Packers want to go their way, they have ways to do it. They're still going to take a pretty steep cap penalty this next offseason if they move Aaron Rodgers, no matter how they try to do it. But if they say, you know what, things are good, let's bring this back. Aaron, you're going to retire as a Packer. It's Jordan Love that's getting traded. There's ways to make the end of that contract and the cap number for Aaron Rodgers somewhat palatable, if that is indeed the route that one would want to try to go. So pointing out that I think it all hinges, though, on Aaron. Is that safe to say, Dane? Because
he's the driver.
Right.
There's no doubt about
they
it.
might. I think either way, Aaron Jones is going to be restructured because I see him coming back next season. They'll restructure him. That's 10 million that they can save right there. There's probably a couple other guys that you look at that you're going to say they're probably going to restructure. You mentioned Campbell. I see that as probably a move that they decide to make to bring him back. But there's other moves here where you say, well, first let's make a decision on Aaron Rodgers, and then some of these other guys will figure out whether we want to kick the can or whether it makes more sense to try to just stick with what we have, and maybe they move on either in training camp or after next season.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think the other thing that I just can't stress enough is there seems to be a narrative out there that if Aaron Rodgers is no longer the quarterback of the Packers and they trade him away, that they just blow it up and they're cutting guys like Aaron Jones. And I just don't think that's realistic. If you bring in Jordan Love, you're trying to set him up to succeed, and you're going to keep some of the other talent around him. So I've seen some national media talking about Aaron Jones getting the axe potentially this offseason. I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if Aaron Jones isn't a member of the Packers this year. They're gonna want to set Jordan up to succeed and have some talent and some skill around him. In addition to some of the restructures, also a huge piece could be an extension to Rashawn Gary. A contract extension to somebody like Rashawn could free up around $7 million in cap space there as well. So, Wags, it's not only some of the existing veteran contracts on there, but also kind of a win-win scenario as far as I'm concerned. You extend one of the best players on the team, and you get some cap relief as well. So that's another route. And I'd be pretty surprised if Rashawn Gary and the Packers don't come to some kind of agreement here this offseason to extend him and keep him in Green Bay for a long time in the future.
I agree with you. And so I think, between Aaron Jones, Rashawn Gary, Campbell, and a couple of these other guys that they can restructure, those probably that's the most realistic path.
Yes.
That I would see. Now, I did mention, Dane, putting on a truly tinfoil hat tonight, which I don't know if I could make this any weirder, but what if the Packers decided that, you know what, if we're moving on from Rodgers, we're realistically not going to be competing for a Super Bowl in 2023, and you don't know about Jordan Love yet. You're going to give him a year to make that decision. Dane, it looks like your darkness retreat may have come to an abrupt halt.
I don't know what just happened. The lights kind of cranked up. So keep going, Wags. I'm going to turn this darkness back down in here.
Well, what I'm wondering is, would it make sense both from a cap relief standpoint and from an asset management standpoint for the Packers to consider doing some post-June 1st trades? Now, you might say that's crazy. They'll never do that. They want to have draft capital back for this upcoming draft. Teams don't usually trade players and wait until the next season's draft. But hear me out. If they decide Aaron Rodgers can be traded post June 1st, and the picks aren't for this draft, now what you're doing is you're saying, okay, let's still see what Jordan Love can do. But if he doesn't work out, we're going to have extra picks in 2024, and you can go into that draft and completely rebuild and go in and get another quarterback if Jordan Love's not the guy. You can also have a lot more cap flexibility to really get out from some of these other guys like a David Bakhtiari, and even, as much as I love him, and Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is 28 years old. I think we're probably looking at a guy that is awesome as he has been as a Packer. Realistically, we might be getting another year or two out of him in the Green Bay uniform. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, and perhaps he can extend his career and be productive in Green Bay beyond that. But his timetable probably just doesn't really match up with what the timetable of some of the other young guys that they're going to have on this roster, especially for the position he plays at running back, if they do indeed turn things over to Jordan Love for this year, and then make a decision on Jordan Love for 2024 and beyond after this season. So it seems to me that a potential another option is, even though I don't think you get a lot of assets for trading Aaron Jones, that's another route, because that could actually save them $16 million against the cap this year. So as slim of a reality as I think that is, what if they decide, let's do these trades post June 1, stock up on draft picks and assets for 2024, and then use 2023 as a true evaluation season and an opportunity going into next offseason to get out from under some of these dead weight contracts that are starting to stock up here at the end of the term. So if you want to get really, really, I think, harsh in terms of some of the decision making that this front office can do, that is another route that I hadn't considered. But looking at the structure of some of these contracts and what they could potentially get, and kind of evening out what the timeline would be for that true rebuild, I think it could make some sense. Now, if Jordan Love's the guy, now you've got all kinds of extra picks, and he's going into his second year as a starter, which is where you would really expect to see him make a jump, a la a Jalen Hurts this season.
I'm speechless. I mean, it's possible though. I mean, anything's possible right now. This is a crossroads year, I think, for the Green Bay Packers. Do they want to double down on what happened last year? Do they want to retool, or is it a true rebuild? And those are all three are options right now. I think it remains to be seen. But Wags, I don't expect the answers to come really soon, but they're going to have to come sooner rather than later.
All right. So for the sake of our scenario, so we could get into some of the free agents that we have, Dane, could we agree that seems like Aaron Rodgers probably leading towards trading? That'll add 9 million against the cap with the additional dead money, and then I see Kenny Clark and Aaron Jones as restructures. Jair Alexander might be a restructure, and then Rashawn Gary as an extension. So that really, after you add Aaron Jones, that's 25 million over the cap. Restructuring those three guys and extending Gary, that gets you about 36 million or so in savings. So you're about 10 or 11 million under the cap, and then you've got Preston Smith as another option. Bakhtiari is another option to restructure. Devondre Campbell. So though maybe they kind of save those as options, just because those are guys maybe you don't necessarily want to restructure right away, depending on how things kind of play out in free agency and how things are playing out from an asset management perspective. But with those moves, generally speaking, the Packers should be around 12 to 20 million or so under the cap. And I think that's realistically probably what we're looking at. So not a ton of money. And I don't think the Packers are going to be going out and making any splashes and going out and signing external free agents, maybe just on the fringes. So I think it's important to just look at the guys that they have and make some tough decisions to figure out who we bring back and try to build around a Jordan Love-led team versus who we say, thanks, it's been great, but you're not in our plans anymore moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to have to be frugal, right? And I mean, I think that I want to be clear that tonight, this podcast, as we're sitting here in the darkness, contemplating the Packers' future in our darkness retreat, we're not speaking with our hearts. We're speaking with what I think is realistic, what the Packers are going to do with some of these guys. Taking emotion out of it and looking at how realistic do we think the Packers, what are they going to do?
Yeah, for sure. So Dane, I think why don't we get into our free agents? And I'm going to start. First guy on the list I have is Adrian Amos, free safety. Now Adrian's going to be 30 years old going into next season. I think he's been a productive Packer overall. He was one of those guys that Goody went out and aggressively signed as an outside free agent when he came to the Packers. And I think this was an up and down season. So we don't need to get into litigating performance per se. But as we sit here today, if the Packers, let's just call it an even 20 million to be able to sign some guys, subtracting about 5 or 6 million the draft class. Do you see Adrian Amos as fitting in with the Packers' plans going into next season?
He's a fascinating one. I could see the team going either way with him, especially with the void years that have happened. They already owe him some money. But what I'm going to say no. I think the Packers are going to move on from Adrian Amos. This is a safety group that they're going to probably be in full-on restructure mode here. I don't see this being the same safety group as it was last year. So is Darnell Savage back? Is he going to be, all this feeds in, is Darnell Savage now the nickel for the Packers and no longer a safety? A lot of question marks, but I will say that I thought that 2022 was a very difficult year for Adrian Amos, not only physically, where it looked like maybe a step had been lost, but also more confusion in the defensive backfield than I can recall in past years. All of that adds up to me that I think the Packers are going to look to start fresh at this position group. And Adrian Amos, they're going to say thank you. It's been awesome. It was a great signing when he came. He earned every penny in his time in Green Bay, but it's time to move on. I think the Packers are going to move on from Adrian Amos.
I can't disagree with you, Dane. I think the Packers, this is a position where they're going to want to go younger. Darnell Savage's kind of up and down performance this past season, notwithstanding, I expect that they're going to invest in the draft and maybe even look to bring in someone on the margins. They've had some success bringing guys in. I mentioned Rasul Douglas as a potential option to move to safety. They've got a lot of talent in the corner room, so maybe they double down, bring in more young talent at both corner and safety, and just build a competition out that way. But I don't think Adrian Amos is, based on his age and probably his price tag, which may not be too bad. But the Packers just don't have the money, and I don't think he's a priority for them moving into next season.
Yeah, and he's been great. It sucks. This is like a great example of a guy that I've loved on the team. He completely solidified a group that was so up and down a number of years ago. But it is a business side thing too, and I think you couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, Dane, I don't know if you need some time to contemplate the next one, but if we're talking about Aaron Rodgers not being on the team next year, I don't know that we have to spend a lot of time thinking about whether the Packers are going to re-sign Randall Cobb. That said, I will turn it over to you. Any thoughts on Randall? Maybe more so just maybe just a nice send-off in your thoughts, because I know how much Randall has meant to the Packers organizations and fans like you and I. So I think realistically, we sort of know where this one's going.
Yeah, love Randall, one of the greats to suit up as a Green Bay Packer. But I'll just say, whether Aaron's back or not, I think that this is a spot that could probably be more well utilized with some younger talent on the roster, or through the draft, or through free agency in a developmental role. He flashed again this last year. I thought Wags, he performed extremely well in moments for the Packers and was helpful in moving the chains. But I think that it's probably time for the Packers to move on. They're going to be moving on from Randall Cobb, but one of the absolute legends in Green Bay, and always be grateful for all the stuff that he did. I'll never forget that opening kickoff for him, his rookie year. We took that to the house, and so many big moments. Always a tough player, played through so many injuries for this team in critical moments. Love Randall Cobb, but I do not see him in the 2023 cards for the Packers.
All right, I've got to interrupt because John Dorn in the chat, hey John, how's it going? Says trade Bakhtiari, Rodgers, Douglas. But I don't, John. What's the deal? Razul? Like
Razul?
what? Come on, man. Come on, man. So it seems like an easy solution. Here's what I'll say though, John, and anyone else listening: Packers trade Aaron Rodgers, Bakhtiari. They actually go further over the cap.
Over the cap, yeah.
So it's weird the way that Rodgers' contract is structured. I'm not saying they won't trade Rodgers, because that clearly, I think they're just going to eat it. Just to be clear, I do think Rodgers will be traded. Bakhtiari, as much as I earlier this season thought this would be Bakhtiari's last season as a Packer, I'm not sure how trading him makes sense from a financial perspective, because if you trade him or you cut him, it's only saving you $5 million against the cap, and you're eating $23 million. So I guess to me, even if Bakhtiari only plays 12 games next season, he's probably worth more to the Packers than he is to not have him on the team, especially with a young quarterback. So I get the frustration with those guys, and it's time to move on. But I think Bakhtiari, actually, as surprising as I am to say this, is more likely to be back next season than not, just given the financial stipulations for trying to trade or cut him at this point. So unless there's a team out there that wants to pony up and give up a bunch of draft assets for David, and I don't see that happening. And I just don't see that there would be a lot of value on the market for teams wanting to trade for David Bakhtiari. As good as he is when he's healthy, the dude, he's got a chronic knee issue, and he's getting up there in age. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of demand out there to make that happen. But I could be wrong. We'll see. Dane, any thoughts on that
No,
proposal there, though? By
I think
John?
you're right. I mean, I think that Bach's more than likely back, with the caveat if they blow it up and they blow it up big, they being the Packers front office, then pretty much anybody's on the chopping block potentially. But that would be a huge blow up if they're doing that with Bakhtiari too. I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, I could see if it was actually saving the money against the
Yes.
cap. And again, I still think it's more likely Rodgers is traded and they'll just eat that. But I don't know that it makes sense to start doing that up and down the roster with the David Bakhtiari, with a Preston Smith, with some of these other veterans, where it just doesn't really move the needle from a financial savings perspective. And unless I'm miscalculating what the potential value of those guys would be to other teams, I'm not sure that the assets that you're getting back in return make it all that worthwhile from the Packers perspective. So anyway, so John, thanks for the comment.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks, John.
I think it's open to going some of these directions and trying to shift some moves on this roster. But we're certainly trying to look at it from all angles here. So we'll definitely see what happens. And look, we've been surprised often enough with the Packers in the offseason. So Dane, going back then to that free agency list, after Randall Cobb, another guy that we were pretty surprised was actually on the team not only last year, but 2 years ago, and that's Dean Lowry. I thought he was going to get cut a couple of times at the end of training camp. So not only do I not expect Dean Lowry to be back, all respect to Dean, I'd be pretty frustrated if the Packers brought him back. Clearly, they need to go young, and this is a youth movement on the defensive line. It was a short period of time, I grant you, but it looked like the defensive line really gelled and upped their performance in the last few games of the season once Dean Lowry was out. They weren't a perfect defensive line, particularly against the run at the end of the season, but they sure showed a lot more flashes of what they could do. So I think it's time for Dean to move on, unless you have any disagreement with me on that one, Dan.
No, I mean, this was a classic example of there's kind of a logjam going on there with Dean Lowry when he was getting those snaps. And we were able to see, I think, a couple young guys in TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt who were showing the potential and the reason that the Packers drafted both of them. Slayton, a couple years ago, a little bit later in the draft, and then certainly Devontae Wyatt with a first-round pick. We saw reason why both of those guys were invested in by the Green Bay Packers. TJ Slayton becoming a very strong run defender, which is what he was drafted for and what we were hoping to see out of him. Very active player there. And then Devontae Wyatt, man, I'll tell you what, in limited steps, you can see all the talent in the world in a guy like that. You really can. I mean, it is hard to pop as a defensive lineman in that defense, and he popped a number of times in extremely limited snaps. It's exciting to know that Devontae Wyatt is a member of the Green Bay Packers, and pairing those two with Kenny Clark, I think that that's the future right there, Wags. And I think that you can make some serious hay with those three guys and maybe a couple tweaks here and there on the roster with this defensive line. So I agree. Dean Lowry, I honestly think the Packers probably kept Dean Lowry about 2 years too long, even though he had a really nice year 2 years ago. They kept him around far longer than I expected them to, and it's certainly time with the contract up for the Packers to move on.
For sure. All right. So I think the last guy here before we take a break, that's again kind of in that timeline mode is Mason Crosby. You've already shared some of your thoughts on Mason, and that it seems like they brought in an awful lot of guys in the last couple of seasons. Yes, part of that was managing the roster during the height of the pandemic. I understand that. But it seems like they've had de facto tryouts for a ton of different kickers over the last 2 seasons. And I don't know if they found anyone that they might bring back and truly compete for a roster spot going into next year. However, it seems like they've been poking around trying to figure out, okay, what are our options post Mason Crosby for a year or two now? And based on the fact that Mason, again, love Mason, 30, going to be 39 next season. And kickers can go forever. I get it. But I think it makes sense that if you're going to kind of reset things here, that you want to bring in another kicker, and then hopefully you find that the right kicker. And if in 2 seasons, Jordan Love, again, if Jordan Love's the guy, maybe not next year so much, but 2 years from now in 2024, 2025, if you're want to getting back into the mix, getting into playoff contention, and really trying to see what type of team you can build and put together to compete down the stretch, you're probably going to want to feel comfortable with a kicker that's shown that they can do it in Lambeau late in the season. And the only way to do that is to bring in someone new to do it next season when maybe the stakes are going to be a little bit lower. In realistically, I don't want to make it sound like they have no chance next season, because listen, teams can rebuild in a hurry in this league, but I'm just trying to be very rational and realistic in this approach. And for that reason, I agree with your earlier comments from a couple episodes ago on Mason Crosby, Dane. Mm-hmm. And I think sadly, he's probably played his last game as a Packer as well.
Yeah, and that one hurts a ton. He's just so many big moments. But I mean, to your point, the Packers already have they signed a guy, Parker White, kicker, sitting on the roster right now, and that's even before they had to free agency in the draft. Clearly, they're looking to add kickers, Wags. I mean, there are times where they had 3 kickers on the roster, right? They had guys active at different points to do kickoff. I think Crosby, when he's on, such a great bad weather kicker, one of the best bad weather kickers I can remember. I mean, Vinatieri was amazing, but Mason Crosby hit so many big kicks and big moments for the Packers. But I think you're spot on. And when we know that the Packers are in a financial crunch the way that they are with the cap as well, I just don't know how they're spending $3-4 million a year on a kicker that's getting a little bit older with a team that may or may not be as competitive as they were a couple of years ago. That doesn't make financial sense. It doesn't make football sense probably either. It would crush me to see Mason Crosby in another uniform. But again, that's what we get being fans of NFL football teams, is, that's part of the business. So I agree. The Packers are going to move on from Mason Crosby. And in fact, my jaw would probably hit the floor if Crosby's back next year, just based on the financials of it alone.
Yeah, for sure. So Dane, I think that kind of there might be a couple other guys we agree on, but to me, that takes care of some of the consensus that I figured are kind of no-brainers. Again, in this scenario that Rodgers is indeed traded and we're going to kind of move on, then some of these other veteran guys, it doesn't make sense. And I think a couple of them, even if Rodgers does for some way come back to Green Bay, a guy like Dean Lowry, I do not see coming back. Adrian Amos may be a little bit more desirable in a situation like that, but certainly they're going to make some moves and try to get younger where they can either way. So Dane, let's take a quick break, and then folks, stick with us, because we're gonna get into some of the guys I think maybe that could go either way. So I'm kind of anxious to see that. But first, let's talk about our sponsor, DraftKings. So folks, are you ready for the biggest Sunday in sports? This Sunday, DraftKings Sportsbook is ready and set to go. And they have all the Super Bowl action you need. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, all customers can get in on the Super Bowl 57 excitement with DraftKings Happy Hour Super Bowl boosts. Check out the DraftKings Sportsbook app every day between 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern and 3 to 6 p.m. Pacific. See what prop bet will be boosted.
Oh, man. So that's 5 to 8 p.m. Central Time here in Wisconsin, folks. And I'll tell you what, Wags, this is going to be a super fun matchup. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to watch the Super Bowl this year. Most years I boycott it just based on principle. But this year, I just think it's going to be a fun game. Chiefs versus Eagles, two of the great quarterbacks right now in the NFL are going to be slinging it. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be an entertaining game. I'm pretty confident of that. But with the DraftKings Sportsbook app, it can be even that much more fun, right? Because you can place bets on all different things, prop bets, players, teams, everything that you can imagine. It's just so much fun. So just go, folks, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use promo code TPPN. New customers can bet $5 on Super Bowl 57 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code TPPN.
All right. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right. So, Dane, getting back, folks, to our darkness retreat, and we're going to be predicting here a couple of the other Packers free agents. And, Dane, I think before we got on, we talked about how we could do this, and to really set the mood, I think we're going to have some contemplative music to go along with thinking about some of these picks, to really channel this darkness, mysticism that we're trying to tap into. And so, Dane, I'm just going to name the next guy on my list.
Yeah.
And we know he's going for some big money. Apparently, he thinks he's going to be worth 15 to 17 million per year on the open market. It's our de facto number one receiver coming into this past season, Alan Lazard. So, Dane, as we get this music going here, what are you thinking? What are you contemplating? What's it telling you about the future of Alan Lazard in Green Bay?
No chance in hell the Packers pay him that amount of money to play receiver in Green Bay. If they traded Devontae and, some of the other guys that have gone, MVS went, I just don't see the Packers getting anywhere close to Alan Lazard. Awesome story, right? Dude signed off of the Jaguars practice squad, joined the Packers practice squad, worked his way up. You got to love the guy, right? He's a Green Bay kind of dude. You like that about him. Hard-nosed, great blocker, all of that stuff, but he's not a number one receiver. The wide receiver market is bonkers right now. As they decide to move on, I think Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Samari Torrey are the future, the wide receiver group, with whoever else also adds on. But I just don't think the Packers are going to be invest anywhere near that kind of money for Alan Lazard, but more power to him if he can get anywhere near that. I wish him well. He's been really fun to watch. It's been fun to watch him grow, but he will not be a Green Bay Packer this year.
Well, let's just assume that he even would get that. Do you really think anyone else would pay that much for Alan Lazard at this point?
No, I don't think he's going to get that, but I still think he's going to be priced out. I think, what did MVS get last year? I can't remember, but I keep hearing that he's going to hit that, if not more. And if that's the case, that's still too rich for our blood.
So realistically, he'll probably get more than the Packers would want to pay no matter what. But let's say the price is more like that 8 to 9 million a year range. I don't know that it would actually be the level that they could get Allen, but now are we talking about something realistic, or are you still saying, nope, I think it's time to go with the youth movement, get maybe another young guy or two in the draft to compete with those young guys you mentioned and move on?
Same. Yeah. I don't think I just don't see a future with Alan Lazard in Green Bay. That is what it comes down to. Obviously there's a price for everyone, but I don't think that they're going to meet it anywhere near what he's going to get. Yeah.
All right. Very good. So I think
I
agree with you.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. So I think we still have retained consensus. So Dane, moving then into our next guy as we get this music queued back up again. We've got Robert Tonyan Jr., tight end. And
I'm very curious.
I know you're really high on Tonyan. Injury 2 years ago. I don't know. He seemed to be quieter this season. Doesn't have quite that same burst. Getting up there a little bit in age. Going to be 29 next year. Robert Tonyan, Dane. What do you think? Is he in the future of the Green Bay Packers?
So I look big picture at the tight end group across the league. And when I look at it, Packer fans and fans of a lot of teams are like, oh, we just got to go find our Kelsey. there's only one Kelsey, folks, and then after that, it's like, oh, well, I want our Kittle. There's only one Kittle. There's only, I would say, a handful of tight ends in this league that are true chain moving tight ends. I think the Packers could do a lot worse than re-signing Robert Tonyan and then bringing in youth at the position. I think the Packers may go pretty high in the draft at the tight end group based on the fact that the Packers offense, I think when they're doing it the way they want to do it, they like to lean on the tight end position quite a bit. So all of that being said, Tonyan looked a little stiff, I thought, at times last year, but still has the best hands on the team. And I'm just going to go out and say it. I think the Packers would be interested in retaining his services on a team-friendly one-year deal with the thought in mind that, he's going to be out there in some 2 tight end sets, but he might not be the primary receiving threat for this team, but he's a guy that can still help you win games, help move the chains. And especially if you have a young guy like Jordan Love looking for just a security blanket that's going to catch the ball 9 out of 10 times, hell, almost 10 out of 10 times, you could do a hell of a lot worse than Robert Tonyan. So I think he's in the Packers' future at the right price on a team-friendly one-year deal.
I agree with you. So we're retaining consensus here, Dane.
Whoa. I wasn't sure with that with you. I honestly wasn't.
In addition to everything you said, I just don't think that he probably has the market value outside of Green Bay that he would for the Packers. Now, I'm not saying the Packers are going to overpay to keep him, but yes, a short-term deal is kind of what I would expect, again, based on his age, his injury history, and everything you said. Not only is a security blanket for a young quarterback, but for a highly drafted tight end that they bring in, it takes those guys time to develop. Tight end is one of the hardest positions in the NFL for any young player to step in and be impactful from day one. Even the best take time to develop that position. So for that reason, I think it makes a lot of sense to have Robert Tonyan stick around as a veteran of this position group and give a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit of time for some of those young guys to step in and maybe expand their role.
Yeah, no, totally. I love it.
Absolutely. Dane, I think then why don't we stick at tight end? I'm skipping around a little bit here, but gotta get our music back on. This is a true veteran guy again. And I think on the surface you say, okay, well, how's he different than some of the guys we talked about before the break? But Dane, Mercedes Lewis, he's timeless. He's going to be 39 next season. But the Packers have kept him around. I think he's stayed relatively healthy for his age. And I'm really curious, maybe using some of the same logic we just talked about with Robert Tonyan, could it make sense to bring Mercedes Lewis back for one more season? Or do you think that he's kind of in the same realm as some of those other veterans we talked about earlier?
I think it's time to move on from Mercedes Lewis. Love me some Mercedes Lewis, but he's kind of that 6th offensive lineman out there. He can still catch the ball when needed, but I think as the Packers do have a bit of a youth movement and other spots, I've seen a lot of Packer media and national media talk about the possibility that Mercedes is back and kind of writing off Robert Tonyan. I actually flip it around. And I think that Packers are likely to move on from Mercedes Lewis and try to give those snaps to whoever they end up drafting, because I do think they're going to draft somebody. And they're going to look to get somebody who's going to, work their way in and get in there. I do think it's either Tonyan or Mercedes Lewis or neither. I don't think they're both back. But I already said I think Tonyan's back, so I think Mercedes Lewis will be gone. Do I think he retires? Maybe, maybe not. I could see him latching on with a team to go and try to grab that all-elusive ring and wish him well, because he's been a great Packer the last number of years. But I do think it's time for the Packers to move on, and I think that they're going to move on from Mercedes Lewis.
Yep, I do agree with that as well. So
really?
Dane, we're kind of
this is wild.
So yeah, absolutely. So let's cue it back up again. Another veteran guy, thought he played really well on the defensive line. Frankly, I thought he outperformed expectations. Came in and certainly had some impact games. To be honest with you, he's going to be 30 years old next season, but he was only a $3.2 million contract this season. season. And we're talking, of course, about defensive lineman Jaron Reed. So, Dane, could he be back on another short-term deal to be that veteran guy on this defensive line?
Man, this is a hard one for me, man. This is a hard one because the Packers do seem to love to bring in a veteran to every year almost. It seems like they bring in a vet to kind of come in and just, pitch in along the defensive line. I was impressed by what he did, especially the second half of the year for the team. He's a stabilizing force on the defense. You can tell the guys like him too. You can tell that he just fit in with the culture in the locker room with the team. If I had to bet, if it's team friendly enough, you could do a lot worse than Jaron Reed. And I do think they're going to have a veteran in. So I'm going to say yes. Jaron Reed's coming back to Green Bay. The Packers would like to bring him back. He showed enough this year. I think he's again going to be relatively an inexpensive signing, but a guy that you're not going to have any issue with if he's getting some real snaps on the defensive line. So all that being said, I think Jaron Reed's back. I do think he's more limited with his snaps this year as they make way for TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt, but I think that he's going to be a nice, solid veteran presence on this defensive line.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how much you want to pay for a veteran stability
Fourth
depth
guy.
piece, if you will.
Yeah.
What we don't know about TJ Slayton and Devontae Wyatt, if they do indeed get their opportunity to get a lot more snaps next season, is if they can stay healthy over the course of a
Right.
17-game season. So you could do a lot worse than Jaron Reed. And the reality is if you want a guy like that for this defensive line group, does it really make sense to say, Jaron Reed, no thanks, but we'll go sign some other guy that
That's right.
maybe you haven't had in the locker room for more than likely about the same price? I don't think so. Now, I'm not 100% on this one. I could probably lean either way. I think it really depends on how aggressive they want to be in the draft and how confident they are. Clearly, with obviously they're going to be very confident with Kenny Clark, but I think there's, as excited as we are about Slayton and Devontae Wyatt getting more opportunities next season, I think they still have an awful lot to prove. So that would be a pretty big risk, in my opinion, if they don't have at least some contingency options within that group as a backup plan to help out as needed. And I shouldn't say that like Jaron Reed wouldn't play. I guess a better way to put it is you need to have someone that you can definitely count on to be stable and from a productivity and performance perspective. And he's not someone that cost a pretty penny. So I think that as a short-term Packer, age notwithstanding, I do see an opportunity similar to Tunyon. Let's bring him back for another year or two.
Love it. No, I think that's great.
All right, Dane, kind of continuing on here. We're getting kind of on the margins a little bit. So I don't know if we need to go through the rest of these guys one by one. So I'm just going to maybe name this as a collective. But, looking at the rest of this defensive line, we've got Jonathan Ford. We've got Justin Hollins. We've got, I guess, technically not defensive line, but I'm just going to throw him in there anyway. Outside linebacker Eric Wilson. So some of these lower price guys, they're all,
right?
They're all unrestricted free agents. What do you think? Any of these guys back trying to compete for on the 53-man roster next offseason?
Yeah, so I'll go down the list. I think Jonathan Ford, I would love to see back in Green Bay. And I don't think that he's going to be out there competing for a starting spot at safety, but could he be a 3? Maybe the 4th? Yes, I think he could be. They signed him after final cuts to come in and do some special teams work, but he popped at different times on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that they might be able to get a pretty good deal for somebody like him, because, he's looking to find some stability in his career as well. And I could see him being a nice match for this Green Bay team. So Jonathan Ford, I'm a yes to him. I think that Justin Hollins, Wags, and I'm curious your takes on these, of course, as well. Hollins could be a low, very inexpensive signing. I thought that he played some pretty meaningful snaps once he came over from the Rams late in the year, but there's no guarantee on a roster spot for somebody like a Justin Hollins. I think that the Packers are probably going to draft another edge. I think like our old pal Ladarius Hamilton's going to be there battling, and they might be fighting for that last fifth spot. So right away, looking at those two, I think the Packers will probably bring them back, both of them back, with Rudy Ford having a better chance on a camp to make the team, but both of them theoretically could come back and also make the 53.
All right, beautiful. And then certainly Dallin Levitt, I think, is kind of in the similar vein.
I liked him this
Ford.
year.
Yeah. He's not a high price guy. He's not someone that really got any defensive snaps. I don't think
he got one.
Season.
Yeah,
but a core special teamer and was a big part of turning around the special team. So I think it would make sense to bring him back.
And he's a Bisaccia guy too, right? He came over from the Raiders, so it wouldn't surprise me at all.
All right, so we've been kind of skipping around. Dane, we haven't spent much of that 15 million or so that we kind of predicted in our scenario. So that brings me to Keyshawn Nixon. And I mean, I'll tell you what, this guy, like, he only cost last year $965,000 for a 1-year contract. Something tells me his price just went up just a little bit here by his performance this year, particularly obviously as a return man, but even in his defensive snaps, I think he proved that he's probably worthy of a little bit of a higher contract structure for what he did out there on the field on the defensive side of the ball as well. So based on his versatility, Dane, please tell me that the Packers can work something out, and without being necessarily a capologist, numbers crunching guy, how deep into the pocketbooks do you think the Packers are going to have to go to keep Keyshawn Nixon around?
I've been reading, and I'm not sure if you've seen any projected numbers, but I've been reading that some are saying it could take about 2-year, 12 million is kind of the going rate or the number that's been floated out there. There's risk involved, right? There's risk involved because he was not a return guy really until the Packers took a chance on him. So there's risk. Was he a one-hit wonder? Was he this and that? But you said it. We were impressed by his play in the slot in a pinch, especially that Tampa game early in the year when he got a lot of run on defense. He looked really, really good. I thought on the defensive side of the ball, he likes to hit. We say he looks like a missile when he plays defense. So that, and then along with the return ability, I would love, obviously, to bring Keyshawn Nixon back with the caveat, I don't want them reaching and breaking the bank huge for him. And I know that might be sacrilege for a lot of Packer fans after him being such a important piece this year and kind of the fire starter for this team. Love to see him back. Think the Packers can get something done with Keyshawn Nixon. But the question becomes, if he starts creeping closer to $7 million a year, $8 million, and some team really wants to bring in this return guy, I don't know if the Packers can match that. And that's where it starts to get a little nerve-wracking for me. But if you're telling me it's 2 years, $12 million, and we can get creative with the cap and give him a bonus and make sure he's happy, we're happy, then I say let's get it done.
Yeah, and I think some fans could take a perspective, which I don't know that I necessarily disagree with. Why, as much as we like Keyshawn Nixon, if you're talking about, kind of a reset here, why pay a return man, top dollar that could, to your point, I don't think he is, but could, to your point, be a little bit of a risk as a potential flash in the pan when you don't expect to be realistically competing for a Super Bowl next season? Well, yes. However, I would say there's a lot of reasons, because if you're going to put in a young quarterback that hasn't played a lot of football in Jordan Love, and you're looking at a new offense, and you're going to try to be more of a ball control, building around the defense team, and hopefully we can still get a big turnaround on the defensive side of the ball, regardless of what we're doing with number 12, then you're going to be a field position team. And if you can get a guy like Kayshawn Nixon to prove that he can tilt the field a little bit, now that can make a big difference in some of these games. Suddenly Jordan Love and offense, maybe they only have to get the ball, a couple first downs and 30 to 30 yards downfield on a drive to get in field goal position versus having to go 50, 60 yards to get into field goal position. And so that could make a big difference for a team that's built for defense, ball control, and a young quarterback that might not be quite as consistent over the long run. So don't get me wrong here. Packers are going to try to win as many games as they can next year. So if you want to construct a roster with players that make sense for the style of play that you expect to be competing with next season, I think Kayshawn Nixon actually makes a lot of sense, regardless of how realistic you think it might be for the Packers to be in contention for playoffs or beyond. They're going to want to try to build the best team that they can based on the roster they have. And for that reason, I think Kayshawn Nixon is a great fit and would be a really nice use of some of that money that we talked about freeing up earlier based on some of these moves. So I think he's back. I'd be very comfortable with a 2-year, $10 to $12 million deal. And I think it's probably going to be one of those things where they can structure it where it's probably only like a $3 to $4 million cap number.
Yes.
And
then we're really talking, because that's what we're really looking for. Yeah,
absolutely. It'll be bonus driven based on productivity. That's pretty standard for a guy that's going to be in a position to be a return man. So,
yeah, and let's not forget, Kayshawn's only 25 years old. So there's a misnomer out there. I think some people think, later in career he popped. No. He's 25, man. He's young. Dude's got a long career ahead of him. So that's the other piece of it, why you invest now, and you might get some really good production out of a good young man that can play ball.
All right. So Dane, we probably used up around, let's say 10 million so far of that money. There's another couple of guys, but the main one I want to talk about that's left on this list. He's one of our favorites. He's been on the pod a couple of times, really held down the left tackle position when Bakhtiari was out. Moved in a difficult position, had to play part-time with all of that nonsense early this season, shifted to right tackle in the middle of the season, battled a couple injuries late in the year. I don't know if fans really appreciated everything that Yosh Nijman did for us this season and season before. Dude only made $540,000 last year. He's going to get a raise, Dane, and he's not going to get David Bakhtiari type offensive lineman raise or Elton Jenkins type offensive lineman raise. But it seems like there's been a long investment for the Packers in Yosh Nijman. And so I'm just going to jump in. I'd be shocked if they don't do whatever they can to bring him back, as long as it's a reasonable contract for the Packers. But what do you think it will take to get it done? And how do you feel Yosh Nijman slots in to the future of the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, pay the man. He's going to be, I think that he's a restricted free agent. They're going to probably put a 2 on him, meaning that a team.
He's an unrestricted free agent.
He's unrestricted? I thought he was restricted.
Yep. According to what I'm seeing here on Spot Track, he is actually one of the unrestricted free agents. So,
yep. Excuse me. I thought he was unrestricted. So, folks, I'll tell you what. If he's unrestricted, they're going to bring him back. If he's restricted, they're going to bring him back. And now it's semantic is what it comes down to. But I think that Yosh Nijman is probably the future at right tackle for the Green Bay Packers, at least for the time being. And I think that after this year, if it's not right tackle, it's left tackle potentially if David Bakhtiari is in the long-term plans of the Packers. With David Bakhtiari's knee injury history too, don't be surprised if Yosh is swinging around and getting some snaps at left tackle this season if Bakhtiari's back. But I think at the end of the day, I think the Packers are going to bring back Yosh Nijman. They invested in him. They believed in him. He's repaid that belief by being one of the hardest working dudes out there. He's a good guy, works his backside off. Pay the guy. They're going to figure it out. I don't know what the figures are going to be. But I've seen around 4 or 5 million a year is what I've seen kind of thrown out for Josh Nijman. I think he's earned that. I think late in the year, there was that criticism when he got yanked from that game, but he was hurt. I don't think people realize how much he was trying to gut that performance out. And then Zach Tom, don't be surprised if Zach Tom's competing even for center this year. I know he played some pretty good football, but I think his future could be in the interior part of this offensive line. So Josh Nijman's back. It just depends on what position he's at, but the Packers are not going to let him go.
Yeah, I would see something similar to maybe slightly less than what they did with Billy Turner a few years ago. A three-year type deal in the low to mid 20 million total. Probably again structure it so that you're able to kind of front load some of that bonus money, depending on game started, things like that. That would be pretty standard for someone in Yasha's position. And I'll tell you what, that could be a very team-friendly deal for some of the reasons you just pointed out, depending on how big of a role he ends up having in the next year or two. So I think he is definitely someone the Packers should prioritize, and it won't cost them a pretty penny to do so.
Totally.
All right. So, Dane, last guys that we have here, last but not least, we've got our two restricted free agents, and that's Tyler Davis and Chris Barnes. So I'm curious what your thoughts here are on those two guys as we kind of wrap up our free agency prediction here tonight.
Let me start with Tyler Davis. Core special teams guy. I think that he can come back low dollar amount and compete in camp. I think that he maybe the local media maybe did him a bit of a disservice last offseason, comparing him to Tunyon and maybe hyping him up more than was necessary. But he's a really good football player. I love Tyler Davis. I think he's a really good special teams guy. I think he'll get a chance to shine a little bit more this year on the offensive side. So that's where I'm at with Tyler Davis. And I really like his blocking ability. That's something that's way under discussed with him. But one of the reasons I think Mercedes Lewis could go is Tyler Davis is a very good blocking tight end. He gets his nose in there and plays good football. So I think Tyler Davis is back. I'd be excited to have him back in the fold in Green Bay. And then I love Chris Barnes. We've talked about him. He's a gritty football player, undrafted free agent kind of guy who came in and just has done kind of that lunch pail work. But I do think that the inside linebacker position is actually kind of crowded. And I can't believe I'm saying that as a Packer fan, but with Devondre Campbell, with obviously Quay Walker, and then the emergence of Isaiah McDuffie, and then talked about Eric Wilson, who's also a free agent right now, who's a core special teams guy. I'm not sure if there's a spot for Chris Barnes right now on this roster, and it might be one of those scenarios where it's mutually beneficial. The Packers say, thanks so much. You've kicked ass for us. Chris Barnes goes, thanks for the opportunity, guys, but I'm going to go try to earn a spot on another roster and get some meaningful playing time on the defensive side of the ball, which I think he can do in this league. So I hate to say it, but I think Chris Barnes might be on his way out of Green Bay, but we haven't seen the last of him. I think that he can play at the NFL level, and he's going to make somebody really happy on defense.
Yep, agreed on both guys, and we know the Packers love to use those compensatory picks in the
Exactly.
6th and 7th round on linebackers. So expect more of the same on that this year as they refill the depth at the end of that position group. So, all right, folks, I think that does it. Dane, looking at what we did here, I'm a little bit surprised. We came into it talking about Packers are going to have to get creative again, regardless of whether they bring Aaron back or not. Restructure to free up some funds. We're kind of leaning towards. It looks like Aaron's probably going to get traded. That puts them $25 million over the cap. But even just getting to around $15 million. Most of these guys at the top that would be more expensive to bring back and sign, we were in a unanimous agreement that they're going to be moving on and probably are not going to be part of the future of the Packers. And they're able to really have plenty, I think, to bring back guys like Keyshawn Nixon and Josh Nyman, who can be real solid contributors for years to come with this younger, potentially Green Bay roster. So I think that we did pretty well, but now the proof will be in the pudding as we see what the Packers front office decides to do moving forward. But I think it'll be pretty fun to look back in a few months and see how close we were with some of these predictions.
It's gonna be an awesome offseason. This is a team that can, they can be competitive. I strongly, truly believe they can be competitive with Aaron Rodgers. They can be competitive with Jordan Love. I think this is a team that can be gritty, that can get some stuff done. So I'm really eager to see how things play out over the next few months, and we start to see the direction of this Green Bay Packers team for 2023.
All right. So, folks, thanks so much for getting weird with us with the Darkness Retreat tonight. And as always, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go Pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will